Hi, this is Dr. Tim Green, and I'm here with Dr. Jason Huett, who is Associate Dean of Online Development and USG eCore. He is also an Associate Professor of Instructional Technology and Design at the University of West Georgia. He is an expert in distance education, and he is one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet. So, welcome, Jason. Thank you for taking your time to let me interview you about your work and what you do in distance ed. So, I'm going to be quiet here and let you talk a little bit about who you are and what you do.
All right. Well, thank you very much for having me. It's an honor to be here. I've seen the list of the people you've interviewed, so I feel pretty humbled to be in that group. My name is Jason Huett. As you said, I'm an associate dean of online development for UWG and for eCore. And to give you a little bit of an explanation of how those two are separate, because it's a tight line for me to walk. Because when I'm working for eCore, I work for the USG. And then when I'm working for UWG, I work just for this institution.
What
And
is
so,
what is USG? Explain that to us.
University System of Georgia.
Okay, thank you.
So it is the governing body, the Board of Regents, that oversees all of the institutions in the state. And so I have to be very careful because when I'm speaking about UWG, I'm not representing eCore. When I'm speaking about eCore, I'm not representing UWG. And in my own head, it gets confusing depending on where I'm at and who I'm talking
Sure.
to. So today I'll probably be talking to you a little bit about what we're doing at the institution of UWG and then also what we're doing with USG
Great.
eCore as well.
Excellent. So, what's your background prior to you're at the University of West Georgia? Where were you before?
I had a really varied background. I'm not a traditional academic, so I took a very long, sort of convoluted path to get where I am today. And so I've worked all kinds of service industry jobs. And at the age of 24, overnight, I became a single parent. And I was actually in a graduate program at the time in English, of all things. And I did not get to finish that program because I had to take a second job and move with my child to support him. And so even from, I guess way back in sort of those formative experiences, I didn't realize I was sort of building this passion for working with what I call post-traditional or non-traditional learners. And I am one of those people. And so I took a really convoluted way to get here. And then I worked a stint at a computer chip manufacturing plant, a line worker. You literally could have trained a monkey to do that job. It was pull trays out of a machine, put trays in a machine, pull trays out of a machine for 12-hour shifts. And then I went on to teach high school for a while, and I was not a successful high school teacher. I felt like I was beating my head into the wall every single day. I've discovered that I don't particularly like to teach people that don't want to learn. And so I had a hard time with that job. During that time, I started working on a master's in secondary ed with an emphasis in instructional technology. And I had to drive as a single parent still 40 miles to the campus and back for night classes. No distance options available to me at all. And then later on decided that I wasn't working out as a high school teacher. I always knew that I wanted to be on a college campus and work on a college campus, and I thought the way to get there would be to work on a doctorate. So I started looking at instructional technology programs across the country, and I applied to several, got fellowship offers to two, and then ended up selecting the University of North Texas to get my doctorate, and then came from graduating there. I graduated that program in 2.5 years. It was the fastest anyone had ever gone through the program. Put myself in the hospital because I was just so stressed out about it. And then took the job at West Georgia. I was offered two jobs. I was offered one here, and then I was offered a position in Montana. Took the one in West Georgia because my wife said, if you're moving us out of Texas, we were going to be near an airport, an easy drive to an airport. So I wound up here as a newly minted PhD in 2006, working as an assistant professor.
Excellent. So, what you do now is part of really kind of your history and your background. I mean, which is
No question.
it's very interesting. So thanks for that. So let's jump into the questions. And one of the first question I want to ask you is, what are some of the greatest challenges that you face in this position and the whole idea of working with post-traditional, non-traditional students?
Um, the biggest challenge I faced personally was shifting from a professor to an administrator.
Hmm.
It took me a good 2 years to get comfortable with that because, and I don't mean this to sound insulting at all, but the academy doesn't train people to be leaders. It doesn't train them to be big picture thinkers. It trains them to know their subject matter to the exclusion of everything else. Know one thing and know it well. We've all heard the phrase "be an inch wide and a mile deep" in academia. Know that one thing and know it really, really well. And I was good at that one thing. I was studying distance education, and I was teaching wonderful classes full of graduate students, and I was publishing and presenting and doing speeches and really, really enjoying it. And then when I was asked to become an administrator, I had to completely shift my thinking and begin to understand all of the other tiles in the mosaic and how they all fit together. And that was a really rough transitional period for me. And so personally, that was a really big challenge I had to come to grips with just to get comfortable in the job that I was doing. It's not that I was doing a poor job as an administrator those first 2 years. It's just that I felt like I wasn't doing anything well because I was trying to be a professor and trying to be an administrator and still holding myself to the expectations for both jobs and really feeling like I wasn't doing either one very well. And I initially had to kind of let the professor thing go and just focus on, and by letting it go, I mean a lot of the research and writing pieces that were taking up so much time, and focus on what I could accomplish as an administrator. And then once I made that transition, I've been pretty successful in that regard. From work-related challenges,
Huh.
uh, this is going to be a little esoteric, but some of the biggest things we've had to overcome at the University of West Georgia and working with affiliate partners with eCore is this concept of institutional culture and inertia.
Sure.
And educational institutions do not change rapidly. They do not like change. They are guardians of tradition. Everything evokes a fear response that's new and different. And so getting them to understand how things are changing in the educational marketplace, getting them to move away from the zero-sum game argument, which I hear some version of all the time. And if you're not familiar with that argument, it basically sums up as, a loss for me has to be a gain for somebody else. And so rather than looking at it as sort of a rising tides lifts all boats mentality, it's always like, well, in case of online learning, if we put this class online, then I'm going to lose all my face-to-face students, instead of saying, I can have all my face-to-face students do an online section and appeal to new and different
Right.
underserved populations and get the best of both worlds. Getting away from that level of thinking has been a really, really tough thing to work through in this job.
Have you been able to do it? I mean, have you made progress with that?
Yeah, we made great success, but the way my brain works, I'm a get it done now kind of person.
Sure.
And I've had to really let things evolve organically, to plant seeds, to step away, to learn when to push, when not to push, and then sort of shape the direction things go instead of trying to like pull people,
Right.
along. And that's been really difficult. Other aspects that have been hard are erroneous assumptions and misunderstandings about online learners, modern students in the modern marketplace. A lot of people get really nervous when you talk about the educational marketplace, and they don't like those dynamics, but it is a part of what we do. And we are in competition, and we do charge for our services, and we do throw up billboards, and we do advertising and marketing, and we do all these kinds of things. And the audience at a lot of these institutions is shrinking, and they don't understand why it's shrinking. And so getting them to understand that 85% of your actual student audience across the United States are post-traditional students and not traditional students, and getting them over those assumptions of who a student is and the role of a public university. I've sat through a lot of these discussions with universities where they say things like, we're doing away with remediation courses and we're tightening up our admission standards. And I'm like, and our admission standards are, almost on par with, UNC, or almost on par with Princeton or whatever. And you're like, good for you, but you serve the public.
Right.
There's an enormous amount of people here that you're just blatantly ignoring and not figuring out a way to better serve that audience. And these are people that could be small schools with dwindling revenue, dwindling students that are sitting next to a military base in a section of the country that has a large percentage of adult students with no post-secondary credentials, and they'll talk about how they're tightening up admission standards and doing away with remediation. And so getting them to see the big picture and understand, who is it that you're trying to serve. And I've talked to them about you're a public university, you serve the public, not a audience. And a lot of them have a particular audience that they want to serve, and that's
Right.
great. And you can still do that, but you can't do it to the exclusion of everything else. And getting people who control the money to understand what you're trying to do, they're they're a lot of people, they balk at the idea of you need to run a university like a business, and no, you don't. You run a university like a university,
Hmm.
but you have to use good business practices.
Oh, interesting.
And
Yeah.
and so getting them to understand the difference is tough sometimes, and getting them to fund the right initiatives to move the whole thing forward instead of looking at ways to rob Peter to pay Paul across the entire system, that's hard. And probably last on challenges is people misunderstanding me as a person. I have been called a demon for what I'm doing, with moving online education across the state. Um, I, uh, I'm seen as the guy who's trying to completely destroy
Mhm.
education as we know it, and and they don't understand how much I love traditional ed, how much I love college campuses, how much I want to spend my entire career on a college campus. I get job offers from business and industry to make more money than I'm making now, but I stay because I love what I'm doing, and I'm here to save the best parts of higher ed, the best parts of traditional ed, by teaching them how to reach outside to pull in more revenue, so they can then support what they want to do locally on the campus. And I'm not one of those people that thinks college campuses are going away. I think it's always going to be a place where we send young adults for a very formative experience. And I have a son who's a college age son. He graduated recently from UGA, and there was no way he was going to go to school on a computer in my basement. I was like, get your butt out of my house,
Exactly.
get on a college campus,
Sure.
go grow, go
Right.
explore, go learn. And, I want to save that piece. But if you can't think strategically about all that's required to do that, then you're just going to keep shrinking and shrinking
Right.
and shrinking until you're eventually merged or shuttered, which we're seeing happen across the country a lot. We're seeing a lot of institutions begin to merge or close
Yeah.
because they've been too slow to adapt to what's going on in the marketplace.
But as you mentioned too, that can't be the experience for everyone, though.
No,
I mean, which is your point.
no, it can't be the experience for most.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's experience for about a 15% subset of the entire. We're talking about the entire population. I know lots of institutions serve much more than that percentage-wise for their core students, but across the whole U.S., you're about 85 to 15 post-traditional
Yeah.
to traditional students.
That's interesting.
And the more you can figure out a way to cater to that 85, which really, if we're thinking about it, should be the traditional student,
Yeah.
because there's
Right.
6 times as many of them.
Right.
Then the more you can figure out a way to adapt to them, the better you're going to serve your 15%
Yeah.
that you want to serve.
Interesting. Great. So, we talked about the challenges. Now let's talk about some of your greatest successes that you've had that you want to share.
Okay. I wouldn't be sitting in the job that I'm doing if I hadn't decided to take a risk as an assistant professor. And I did that because the way my brain works, I wasn't focused just on my subject matter material. I wanted to know more about what the university said was important. And so I encourage people that are in those roles. It doesn't really matter if you're an instructional designer, if you're an assistant faculty member, if you're a staff member, some other professional role on the campus. Listening to what the university is saying is important to them, that they want you to spend your time on, and then figuring out a way to adapt to that and take a few risks in that regard tends to pay off. And the example I have is one of my greatest successes is I was listening to the president give a talk about how they wanted to increase the Carnegie classification of the university. And the way to do that was to have more doctoral graduates. And we don't have a lot of doctoral programs on this campus. And at the time, we had one in the College of Ed, and it was a program that was really suffering. It had never had a student out of a 9-county radius. It was a cohort model program. So I talked to my chair about this, and I said, there's got to be something to do about this program to make it better. She said, well, go join their advisory board. And she wrote a letter, put me on the advisory board. And immediately I started talking with the director about what if we turn this into an online doctoral program. And he was an energetic guy, and he liked the idea. And he's like, well, put a proposal together and let's see. So I worked a year of my life on this proposal, tweaking, fine-tuning, going over, under, around people to get it accomplished, lobbying for money for the dean. When we got near the end, I actually took 6 people, and I locked them in a room for 4 days at the university. Got the dean to pay them like $2,000. Locked them in for 6 days, fed them lunch, did a 9 to 5 kind of thing. And I said, here's my whole plan for redoing this thing. Where am I wrong? What have I missed? And got great advice from all the people around the room. And so we came out with a proposal, and the next year launched as an online
Mm.
doc program. And we went from having 12 applications to having over 150 as an online doctoral program. We
Nice.
were able to then select the best 30 students out of 150 instead of any 12 that applied. And the program has absolutely taken off. It was handed over to another great director. She's done a fabulous job with it. And it just continues to evolve and grow and get better. And so we were able to almost, within about a year's time span, completely uplift our Carnegie classification of the institution, because we were looking at now graduating the number of people we needed to advance into the system. And so and I took that as an assistant professor, and I stepped on some toes. And so
Mhm.
it was politically, it was probably not a smart thing to do, but I figured, what the hell, I'll get the shot. And then afterwards, they came to me and said, do you want to come to work with eCore and our online initiatives here at the campus, because we want you to help us do what you just did on a bigger scale. And so that's one of the successes I'm the most proud of as a professor. At the University of West Georgia, separating eCore from West Georgia. At West Georgia, I'm really proud of a white paper I put together. I led a task force, and we did a white paper, and the white paper outlined a strategic plan for targeted advancement of online teaching and learning at West Georgia. And we were able to get unanimous faculty senate approval of that strategic plan through the system. And that gave us, even though we haven't been able to accomplish all the things on the list, this was back in 2011, it gave us the agreement and the foundation that we needed to argue for what we needed to accomplish, things that we could accomplish. So we could say, no, you've already agreed to this. Remember, here's the white paper that you signed on to. And it gave us leverage that we needed to start working on making some big advancements at the university. And so we've been able to do things like get the university to pay attention to adult learners and military personnel. And now they've opened a center for adult learners and military personnel. They're looking at reaching out to them in big ways with new programs. We were able to ramp up joint dual enrollment in the area high schools around to get more kids, more high achieving kids into college classes. We were able to develop a quality control plan for the online courses and programs on the campus that we're still, in sort of the nascent stage on, but we've got great buy-in on it. And so we've been able to make some really good advancements because of the work put in on that white paper. And then I have a fantastic team of like-minded people that are always pushing, these issues forward at the university. With eCore, and eCore is really where I spend most of my time now. My greatest success is I spent years traveling up and down the state, recruiting institutions to participate in eCore. And so just to be clear, eCore is a multi-institutional collaborative that delivers the first 2 years of the core completely online to anybody in Georgia that wants it. Okay. So we have an administrative staff that runs all of the faculty support, student support, course design, all those sorts of things. And then we rely on faculty from our affiliate institutions to teach the classes. So I would have to go out and recruit affiliate institutions to join eCore. And last September, September 14th, we hit sort of a critical mass to where the Board of Regents looked at us and said, every institution in Georgia, with the exception of the 4 research ones, must adopt eCore. And so we're getting ready to launch next fall with more than 20 affiliates now.
Wow.
And when we started, I think we started around 4. And so now we've gone system wide, and I am super proud of that. And that has allowed us to serve large numbers of students. We're going to probably be around 11,000 enrollments come fall. And we were the only group in all the USG, all the institutions in the USG, to cut tuition costs. We went from 189 a credit hour to 169 a credit hour. And we've transitioned over half of our courses now to open educational resources. So what the student pays is 169 a credit hour flat for the class, and that's it. And so that has been a real boon for our adult learners, our military learners. Our average demographic in eCore is a 27-year-old female. And so we're reaching out to new audiences. Even though we still have a bunch of traditional students taking the classes, we see more and more post-traditional students coming in and taking the classes every year. So I'm super proud of that. And out of this process too, because we have so much control of the process, we've been able to develop a comprehensive student support model that's been written about in the country, that we're constantly interviewed about. Super proud about that, and the team that works on that. We've been able to do things like develop memorandums of understanding for all the faculty that teach for us, that adheres them to best practices in dealing with diversity of learners, and in the time it takes for them to grade assignments, what type of communication they need to provide for the students, all the kinds of things that we know make a real difference in a class. We've been able to implement from a systems perspective across all of eCore, and it's been very successful, and it's super exciting.
It sounds cool. I have a couple questions that from what you've said, and if you don't mind, you talked about lowering costs. What was one of the major factors in being able to lower the cost for tuition? If you don't mind talking about that.
Oh, no, I can talk about any of this. We because we have because we were able to build this from the ground up from a systems thinking perspective, we've been able to build in efficiencies into the system that you don't see in normal higher education institutions. So we can serve 11,000 students with a team that fits around a conference table. And that is, I mean, don't get me wrong, they're the best teams you could ever possibly work with, and they are absolutely dedicated to what they do. But we have low levels of overhead because of that. And because we have a shared model where we rely on faculty from other institutions to teach, and we're paying those institutions to teach, because we can maintain high levels of quality control, we have the capacity, how to put this nicely, we have the capacity not to invite faculty back to teach for us who don't work well in that environment. So a lot of institutions, they can't do that, so we can keep our overhead down that way as well. And so we've just been able to have a design team that comes together with a standardization of course shells, the layouts, all those sorts of things that build efficiencies into the system that allow us to then keep costs down for the students.
So you just mentioned the quality control plan. What does that deal with? I mean, is that from the design of the courses to the delivery? What are the major elements of that?
If we're talking about eCore, eCore is very structured, and we control, I mean, literally all aspects of quality control in the course. I mean, down from we have teams of instructional designers that work with subject matter experts to design classes across the entire spectrum. So from the look and feel and design of the course A is going to look like course B, is going to look like course C. So the students are never lost or confused when they're moving through the system, so they know what an eCore course looks like.
And so that's no matter what system or what institution within this system they're taking it from. So would the students ever know?
The students know they're in an eCore class?
Yeah, well, no. Would they know that, for instance, they were taking one from your university and a different university? Would they know the difference and where the no? Yeah,
it's going to look the same to them. They'll know their professor, where their professor's
sure.
from,
Okay.
Those kinds of things. But the class itself is going to look the same regardless of where they're taking it from. So there's no like institutional branding or anything on the courses. We control all of that. And then we actually go through and we have all of everything. We're big data worshipers, and so we collect massive amounts of data, and everything is from assignment objectives all the way to course objectives to aligning all the way up the tree. We've got all that mapped out every year. In fact, I'll send you a link to our fact book that outlines all of this, and you can include it with the interview. But it's 100 pages of graphical data that we collect every year, looking at all aspects of student performance, faculty performance, course design and revision. And so we're able to control it at a level that is really more, we kind of took a private industry model, like when you're going to see like a for-profit, and then combine it with the best of the for-profit idea with the best of the traditional ed idea and kind of merge the two. We recently got Quality Matters adopted across the campus, which was a 2.5-year slog to get that through. But now we've got lots and lots of faculty participating in Quality Matters training and course reviews across the campus, and it's having a significant impact on the quality and consistency of the classes and the programs.
So the third question, you've kind of actually started talking about these, like, so what are some of the greatest challenges of designing and delivering online teaching and learning to all learners? I think one of them that you mentioned was faculty who aren't trained to do it, and how do you get them ramped up? So talk a little bit about that, if you don't mind, kind of in a general way of what do you see as, in your experience, some of these challenges when you're trying to design and deliver online education for not just the non-traditional, but for all learners?
Well, um, it's the balancing this concept, and you're going to hear this mantra. My team knows this mantra inside and out, both on eCore and UWG side. It's accessibility, flexibility, and affordability. That's our mantra. So when we're approaching design, we're saying, are we making education more accessible? Are we making it more flexible? And are we making it more affordable for students, or some combination of the three, for all the different audiences that we're looking at? So we try to preach that mantra to the folks that come in and visit with us. It's our mantra that drives what we do in eCore. And so getting them to look at the design in a way that is particularly, affordability is often beyond their control, particularly at a state institution, but getting them to look at it from an accessibility standpoint and a flexibility standpoint. Those are the areas where we focus a lot of our instructional design, and getting them to rethink this idea um, of time as a constant, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
They initially come in with this idea that really the achievement is the variable and time is the constant, and we're trying to flip that, to make achievement more the constant. This is what we want them to master, and then letting them, and then playing around with the idea of time, and so building in that flexibility, that different ways of doing assignments, different ways of handing assignments in, different time frame windows for doing assignments, revisiting things from a mastery perspective to allow resubmits. Those sorts of things are what we work with, and we find that it works well across all audiences, but particularly with your post-traditional learners. And challenges really state and federal regulations.
Mm.
Keeping up with all of them in the classes. I mean, you're talking about your accessibility and disability regulations, right. All of your state regs about can you deliver online programs to the people that come from that state? Can you hire faculty that come from that state? We have to stay on top of all of that sort of stuff. And so modern instructional designers really have to understand this morass of laws and rules, and they're constantly shifting and changing, and it's hard to stay on top of them. And designing for accessibility 508 disability stuff, really difficult, really time consuming, and getting faculty to understand the importance of doing that work and providing those transcripts and doing the kinds of things that you have to do to make sure that it's available to the learners before they start the class, and not as a reactive measure, because the law says it has to be proactive and not reactive. And so those are the aspects we focus a lot on the big challenges to the design, and just also from an institutional perspective, building comparable support structures for online learners. So you're looking at things like library access and health services access and tutoring access, and all the kinds of things that a normal traditional learner would have, but that post-traditional learners are still going to expect to have.
Sure.
But they have to be delivered in novel ways to them. And then once you figure out the ways you deliver it, getting those incorporated into all of the course designs, figuring out ways to pay for those services, those kinds of things are really big challenges for designing and teaching for learners of all ages.
Awesome. So the last question I ask everyone I interview is advice. So what advice can you give? So for those who are instructional designers or in the educational technologists, and others who want to work with, as you're calling them, post-traditional online students, what advice do you have? What advice can you give?
Based on my own experience, and I told the little anecdote about how kind of went out on a limb and worked on designing this doc program, mm-hmm. because I really wanted it to serve a different audience, and it meshed with the strategic plan of the university and what they said that they were focused on. The first piece of advice I give is be prepared to be an entrepreneur, not just a steward. If you come into these jobs thinking that you're just going to continue on and not really think outside the box, and not take advantage of opportunities to really push the envelope and become a bit of a leader. And I don't care. I mean, I know it's hard to do, but I encourage this in all of my instructional designers, all of my staff members. If you see something that needs fixing, if you see an avenue that we should be going down, if you see a better way to serve students, speak up. Let us know. Let us pursue it. And a lot of times I'll take those instructional designers and I'll put them on university committees when they have a good idea, and I'll say, I'm going to put this person on this committee because they had a great idea, and I want you to hear their voice about why it's important to push these kinds of things forward. So, listen to your institution, look at where they're going with post-traditional learners. Are they actively pursuing it? Are they just paying it lip service? And if it's something that you're passionate about, take up the cause and push for it and lead it in your design, in your interactions with people across campus, those kinds of things.
Excellent. Yeah,
Um,
good advice.
Second piece of advice,
Sure.
understand your post-student audience and design for them. Don't impose your assumptions on post-traditional learners. And this is really hard for traditional faculty. Traditional faculty oftentimes come to it with an assumption of the learner that they serve. And post-traditional learners don't fit that model. When you look at the statistics about them, they tend to be wage earners. They tend to want to bounce between work and family and school, et cetera, all on their schedule, not yours. They are hugely concerned about return on investment for their time and money, and what the employment outcomes are for what they're learning. They tend to be very goal driven and independent folks. They have opinions, and they are not afraid to voice them loudly and to everyone. And they're not the timid traditional student that's just going to sit there and take bad instruction. They often need developmental education, which a lot of institutions are cutting back on because they haven't been in school forever. So they may need math help, and they may need writing help, and they may need a lot of patience in that regard. And so that's difficult, to design for. And then they also expect high levels of communication and student service and human touch. And I tell all my faculty, especially when you're dealing with post-traditional learners, pick up the damn phone. If you're teaching online, it's like people forget the phone works. They want to do everything by email. They want to do everything by discussion forum posting. Don't. Pick up the phone. It will go a million miles with these learners to hear your voice on the phone,
Sure.
to say, I noticed you missed that quiz. I noticed you haven't checked in 5 or 6 days. To do that extra little bit of service for post-traditional learners really makes a huge difference. And so when you're working as a instructional designer or professor, think about those things, when you're putting classes together, when you're teaching these individuals. From a career standpoint, third piece of advice I'd give you is if you're wanting to get into the instructional design field, instructional technology field, and I'm a pragmatic person. I am as practical as they come. I'm going to tell you, focus on prior learning assessment, competency-based, and flipped approaches right now. I mean, that is where you want to channel your research interests. That is where you want to channel your study. That is where you want to channel your design. Where online learning was 10, 15 years ago, that is where competency-based ed is right now. That is where PLA is right now. When you're looking at traditional instruction on a campus, most of it is going to be flipped. They are going to start using campus spaces, your direct instruction, your lectures, all that stuff that a learner can fast forward, pause, rewind. They're going to expect to be able to do that. It's not going to be one-off lectures anymore. And those campus spaces are then going to be used, that class time is going to be used for coming together for debate and group work and discussion and high-level problem solving and ill-structured problem solving. And that's what the classroom time is going to become. And it's going to become less about that direct instruction. So if you really want to get in this field, competency-based, flipped approaches, PLA, they're going to have an even bigger impact on the field than online learning did, when we look at it, longitudinally for the last 10 to 15 years. And I guess the last piece of advice I'd give you is just understand now that everything revolves around big data and assessment. When you have to be able to track, as we said earlier, from your assignment objectives to your course objectives to your program objectives to your institutional level objectives, and you have to be able to provide data on all of that. And then you have to use that data to then inform your design, inform the changes that you're going to make, inform your budgeting, inform everything that you have, because your accreditation groups, your state groups, your local groups, everybody that, even your business, your industry, everybody who's got their sort of lens focused on education right now, all want the data. They all want to know, how do you know what you're doing is having an impact? And so you have to be able to incorporate all that into your design. And the learning management systems are getting better. We're seeing those evolve into much more adaptable systems that gather this data for us and put it in useful formats. And so we're going to see a lot of that evolution over the years. But just understand that you can't. You're gonna be working with professors. You're going to be a professor working with professors, working with educators, K-12, everywhere you're looking at right now, that are going to expect you to understand the importance of data, how to assess it, and then what to do with it to affect positive change.
Excellent. Some great advice. Thank you. That was very good. A lot to a lot to digest and think about, but that's good stuff. So again, I want to thank you, Jason, for taking your time, talking about your work, talking about online distance ed with post-traditional learners and really all learners of all ages. So thanks again for your time. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you again for having me. I really enjoyed it.